Hello, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about NotebookLM. NotebookLM is an AI tool that helps students or anyone take a bunch of different articles and synthesize them. It helps organize their ideas. It can create study guides, timelines, all sorts of different things, right? And the really cool thing about it is it can has a podcast feature where the AI can generate two people talking about the ideas that are going on in one or more article that you can upload. There seems like there is a lot of benefit to this, right? It can be a time saver, a huge time saver, right? It's going to generate kind of study materials, timelines, like I said. It could even do maybe lesson outlines, right? And make it much faster. It frees up our time for us to kind of focus on using that information a bit more creatively or kind of taking that learning to the next level, right? I think that specifically the Discover Sources feature seems like a really good tool for starting a research project, right? Or building off of maybe a paper that you really liked. You have one paper, you really like the ideas behind it, you want to find others that are similar to build the research for your project, right? Maybe you want to kind of pull out themes and connections. This is something I thought was a pro and con with NotebookLM, right? It seemed like it was really good for pulling out themes, but there was no connections between the themes, right? I have a picture, I'm going to put it in over here. Um, and really, you can see that although each paper has expanded on the themes, it has the themes and it builds off of them and it shows you connections within a specific paper, they don't connect seemingly between the papers, at least not when I was looking into it. I think the podcast ability in itself is fantastic, right? It's a great way to kind of dissect the material at a base level. It gives you a good general understanding. I found that when they were discussing all the papers that I uploaded, which was from a previous education course, it was really, it was helpful. But it was general, right? And my worry here is that students aren't going to take the time to fact check, right? You have a nice little succinct 35-minute podcast that's telling you about the themes and the connections and, kind of talking about what you want to know from it, especially if you're giving it specific prompts, right? Are you really then, if you're a junior high or a high school student, are you going to go back and read through, perhaps hundreds of pages to check if that information is correct? Probably not, right? But it does give you a nice general overview, but I think that spot specifically should be treated with caution, right? I know using other sources of AI that I've used for longer, such as ChatGPT, often the references and things that it pulls are incorrect, right? And even sometimes on NotebookLM, it's taken some liberty to go a step further, right? Even if that's not what we specifically wanted, right? When asked specific questions, though, outside of that podcast and, perhaps within it as well, I think it does do really well at breaking things down between articles, right? I asked it for the previous course. I took some of the papers we had to read. How does this tie in with the Nova Scotia Inclusive Education Policy, right? And I thought it was fantastic. It was sorted out, part by part of the education policy, and it talked about how different articles supported each section of the policy, right? And how they kind of connected together. So on that, right, I can see that it would be a very good tool, but it shouldn't be everything, right? It's a really good tool. It can be a study guide, right? There's that study guide feature. I could see that being really helpful for, making a study guide for getting ready if you're, especially if you have a practice test or something of that sort that you're able to upload. The timeline feature itself, I thought that was great. It showed sort of a whole list of dates. It kind of expanded on the info that it was given. It flushed out a really detailed timeline based on, what was given to it. There was small things missing here and there, and I think that is just sort of the AI itself evaluating what is most important and what is perhaps less important. And I think that is something to watch out for, right? Because, when the AI is determining that, it's really important that we fact check it, we review it, and we, give it that prompt notes to get it where we want, right? To get the information that we actually need. And if we're not reading those papers and we're not actually understanding the information that's behind it, how are we going to know to do that, right? The FAQ I thought was great for going over key terms, concepts. I think it'd be fantastic for studying, right? Cementing the important stuff. I think it's as a whole, a really good idea sparker. It's like having a buddy to brainstorm with, right? We can ask it questions, especially across multiple documents. And I think that's a really great tool. And just the fact that we can have this sort of podcast feature even with this new beta version that doesn't work quite well, but where you can ask questions. I think if that develops a little bit more, that can be really fantastic because it gets you to be kind of on the fly and spontaneous in interacting with the material in a really productive way, right? That is going to kind of foster knowledge. I do think that the biggest sort of pitfall of it is that it is easy. It's quick, right? It's almost like when I was in school, it was Spark Notes, right? We don't want to read the whole book. I mean, I was always an avid reader, so I like to do the reading. But if you didn't want to do the whole book, you didn't want to read it, you could look at the summary, look at the Spark Notes, right? But then you don't have that full understanding, right? Maybe you don't know how to actually do the research yourself, how to pull out those important themes yourself. And when you're only relying on the AI, I think that can become a problem, right? We're relying on these things and we don't even know how to fact check them because we're so used to it that we no longer know how to pull out connecting themes. We no longer know how to kind of do our own research. I think it is really important that us as educators, we are forthright and sort of forthcoming with our own use of AI and really trying to promote use in an ethical way, right? In a functional way that's going to design and aid our own education, our own growth, right? I think that it's a great tool, but it should be used as that, not the in all end all and be all sort of thing, right? I think that, as teachers, we have to teach our kids how to learn on their own and design, assessments and projects and, ways to foster learning that can't be done solely using AI, right? And really just try to teach them and connect with them, and let them know that, hey, we're trying to teach you how to function in the world as best as possible, right? And these are skills that are important. Really kind of, being personal, leveling with them, I think. This is important stuff that you're going to need to know. AI can be really useful as a tool, but it is just that. It's a tool, right? And how can we use it without relying on it and without it hindering our education, using it to kind of boost our education, right? And I think this tool can do that if it's used responsibly. And I think kind of having that upfront conversation will be really important.